They abandoned a baby in a sack to die. Then a cowboy heard a tiny voice say, "Mama, please Arizona Territory." October 1876. The desert winds moved heavy and dry across the canyon trails, carrying the kind of silence that could break a man's spirit. Nights were colder than death itself, and even coyotes kept their distance from the open ground. But on this night, something strange shattered the stillness. At first it was faint, so faint that any rider could have mistaken it for the wind brushing through the rocks. Yet the sound returned, soft but desperate, a trembling cry that didn't belong in the wilderness. A cowboy riding along the trail slowed his horse, his heart tightening as the noise grew clearer. It wasn't the cry of an animal, nor the echo of any spirit he'd ever heard whispered about in saloon tales. It was smaller, weaker, and far more haunting. Somewhere in the darkness of the desert night, a baby was calling out to be saved Arizona Territory. October 1876, the desert night was cruel and endless, but the sound Ethan Cole heard refused to fade, pulling him deeper into the darkness like a whisper of fate. He reined in his horse, the leather creaking under his grip, as his heart pounded faster with every echo of that frail cry. His horse stopped on its own, ears sharp, hooves restless, sensing something unnatural ahead. Ethan leaned forward, eyes scanning the trail, his breath heavy in the cold air until the whimper returned, softer this time, but desperate, too human to ignore. He swung off his saddle, boots sinking into the dust as he followed the sound, each step careful, each second stretching longer than the last. And then he saw it, a sack half buried in the dirt, motionless except for the faintest twitch from inside. Ethan's chest tightened as he knelt, hands trembling while he reached out, and the moment his fingers touched the rough fabric, another cry rose from within, weak but stubborn, as if life itself was refusing to be swallowed by the desert. He tugged the sack open, and the world around him froze. Inside lay a newborn, fragile as glass, its tiny fists clenching at the air, lips quivering with the wordless plea of survival. Ethan swallowed hard, staring at the helpless child, his mind caught between disbelief and fury. The baby's skin was cold, the blanket around her damp with desert dew, and yet her eyes flickered open just enough to meet his. Eyes that knew nothing of cruelty, eyes that had no idea she'd been left to die in silence. Ethan's heart clenched as if struck, and he whispered a curse under his breath at whoever had abandoned her. He slid his arms under the small body, lifting her gently as though she might break with the slightest force, and the weight of her innocence pressed heavier than any saddlebag he had ever carried. The desert around him felt darker, more hostile, as if the land itself disapproved of what had been done here, and Ethan knew this was no accident. Someone had wanted the child gone, erased, forgotten, and leaving her out here was no careless mistake. It was a sentence. His jaw tightened as the newborn whimpered again, voice shaking the quiet night with more strength than seemed possible for something so small. Ethan pulled his coat open and tucked her against his chest, shielding her from the desert chill, whispering softly though his voice cracked with emotion he didn't recognize. He had seen death many times, friends lost to raids, strangers buried in shallow graves by the roadside, but never had life clung so fiercely in front of him. Never had a cry carried so much weight. The horse snorted impatiently, pawing at the ground as if urging him to move, and Ethan knew he couldn't linger. Whoever left the child here might still be watching, waiting for silence to claim her. With steady hands he mounted up, holding her close, and turned his eyes toward the distant lights of town, unaware that shadows already stirred in the ridges above, and that saving this child was only the beginning of a storm that would change everything he thought he knew about mercy, justice, and the cost of carrying a life that fate itself seemed ready to abandon. Ethan rode through the endless dark, the newborn pressed close to his chest, her tiny breaths faint but steady, and though the trail stretched silent before him, his mind was louder than the pounding hooves beneath. His hands trembled around the fragile weight he carried, for never in his life had he held a child, not his own, not anyone's, and the unfamiliar warmth of her small body cut through the desert cold sharper than any blade. Then, as the horse climbed the ridge, the baby's lips parted and a sound slipped out, faint, broken, yet clear enough to pierce straight into his soul. A single word, barely whispered, but certain, "Mama." Ethan froze in the saddle, his heart hammering, the word echoing inside him like a bell in an empty church. Fear gripped him, for it was unnatural, impossible even. Yet the voice was there, carried by a breath too weak to last, and it shook him deeper than any bullet wound ever could. Anger followed close behind, rage that anyone could abandon something so pure in a sack of dirt to die without even a name. He bit down hard, his jaw stiff, tasting dust and bitterness as he realized the cruelty of the hands that had left her. Questions stormed inside him. Was she unwanted, or was she a secret someone feared? Was she born into a sin too heavy for her mother to carry? Or worse, was she meant to be erased before she could even take her first steps in this world? Ethan's chest burned with thoughts he could not silence, and for the first time in years he felt powerless. The desert had taught him to fight, to hunt, to kill when needed. But nothing had ever prepared him for protecting a life this small. Every cry shook him with a strange mix of terror and tenderness, for with each sound, she reminded him that she depended entirely on him, a man who had sworn he would live free, untethered, without responsibility beyond his own shadow. Now, here he was, bound to something greater than himself, and that realization frightened him more than the gunmen and outlaws who haunted the frontier trails. He looked down at her, the glow of the moon brushing across her fragile face, and whispered, almost pleading with the night, "I don't know how to be what you need." His voice cracked, but the baby stirred, eyes half closed, and her small hand brushed against his coat, as if she understood more than words ever could. Ethan's throat tightened, his eyes burning as memories he had buried deep threatened to return. Memories of a family he had lost long ago, a woman he once loved, and the child they never had. The desert wind howled, carrying sorrow through the canyons. But Ethan kept riding, torn between fear and determination, knowing that whoever had thrown her away had also lit a fire inside him, one he could neither escape nor ignore. Ethan's grip tightened on the reins as the horse carried them through the hollow silence of the desert, and every gust of wind seemed to whisper the same truth, that carrying the child meant he was stepping onto a path lined with enemies. For whoever had abandoned her had not done it by accident. They wanted her gone, and if he chose to protect her, he would be standing against forces willing to kill without hesitation. The weight of that decision pressed down on him heavier than the revolver at his hip, yet the thought of leaving her behind clawed at his soul like a wound that would never heal, because the image of her tiny chest rising and falling so weakly, the sound of that faint word "mama," and the trembling fists reaching for warmth would haunt him forever if he rode away. His heart was torn, fear warning him that this child was danger, that she was a secret carrying death with her. But his spirit refused to let her last breath fade beneath the cold desert moon. He knew outlaws, he knew bounty hunters, he knew the cruel laws of men who made their living on blood and silence, and he understood the truth well enough. If he carried her, he would be hunted. But Ethan had lived his life under open skies where no law ruled except survival, and for the first time survival meant more than himself. He looked down at her small face resting against his chest, and in that moment he made his choice, whispering into the wind with a voice steady but heavy with fire. "If fate left you to die here, then fate will have to go through me first." The words tasted like iron, like a vow carved into stone, and as he spoke them he felt the shift inside his bones, the transformation of a drifter into a guardian. The horse moved faster as if it too understood the urgency, hooves striking sparks from the stones, the desert stretching wide around them with shadows twisting across the ridges. And though Ethan's eyes stayed sharp, he knew he was no longer alone in this fight. The child stirred, letting out a faint sigh, as though the world inside her already trusted him more than the blood that had abandoned her. And Ethan felt the burn of responsibility searing his chest like a brand. The choice he had made was dangerous, foolish even, but it was the only choice his heart allowed him to take. And as the moon sank lower, he realized that protecting her would not just test his courage, it would test every belief he had held about life, death, and justice. Somewhere in the darkness, men were watching, waiting, and Ethan could almost feel their eyes on his back. But he did not look behind, because the road ahead was now the only path, and it was carved by the cry of a child who had been left to die yet found a protector who would fight the desert, the night, and any enemy that dared to take her away. The night split open with the sudden crack of a rifle, the sound tearing through the still air and echoing across the canyon walls as Ethan's horse reared, eyes wild with fear, and the baby whimpered a gay,